My Aunt Agatha was a force of nature. She stood tall with a presence that filled any room and possessed a will as unbending as iron. One might have described her as having a rather masculine resolve, a stark contrast to her husband, my Uncle Arthur. He was a slight, delicate man with a gentle disposition and a will that seemed to bend to the slightest breeze. From the very beginning of their marriage, he was no match for her. It was as if, in her presence, he began to physically and spiritually shrink. Aunt Agatha's formidable personality was simply too much for his gentle soul. This constant pressure seemed to erode his spirit and, consequently, his health. Before long, he fell into a state of perpetual illness. My aunt, in her own commanding way, took charge of his care. She summoned half the doctors in town, each prescribing a new remedy, until their home resembled a small pharmacy. She ensured he took every single pill and potion prescribed, convinced that her diligence was the highest form of love. But all her efforts were in vain. Uncle Arthur only grew weaker, until one quiet morning she found he had passed away in his sleep. Aunt Agatha was deeply shaken by the loss of her dear husband. Perhaps, in the silence of his absence, she felt a pang of regret, wondering if her relentless kindness and the mountain of medicine had been a burden rather than a cure. Regardless, she channeled her grief into honoring his memory with the same intensity she applied to everything else. She spent a fortune on her mourning attire, wore a miniature portrait of him around her neck that was nearly the size of a pocket watch, and had a full-length, life-sized painting of him hung in her bedroom. The world applauded her devotion. A woman who so honored the memory of one husband, her friends whispered, surely deserved another. After some time, my aunt decided a change of scenery was in order. She moved to her large country estate in Northwood County, a house that stood alone amongst the gray, rolling hills. It was a lonely, wild part of the country, and the old house reflected its surroundings. The servants, most of whom had come with her from the city, were unsettled by the gloomy, old place. They whispered of strange noises and were afraid to walk alone through its vast, shadowy rooms. Even Aunt Agatha, with her nerves of steel, seemed to be affected by the house's isolating atmosphere. Each night, before retiring, she would personally inspect every door and window, locking them securely with her own hands. She would then take the bundle of keys, along with a small box containing her money and jewels, to her bedroom for safekeeping. She was a woman who saw to all things herself. One particular evening, after dismissing her maid, she sat at her vanity table, arranging her hair. Despite her sorrow, she never neglected her appearance. As she sat gazing at her reflection, first from one side, then the other, her thoughts drifted to an old friend, a wealthy gentleman from the area named Mr. Caldwell, who had visited her that day. Suddenly, she was sure she heard a faint sound from behind her. She spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the imposing portrait of her dear departed Arthur hanging on the wall. She let out a heavy sigh in his memory, a customary sound whenever his name was mentioned, and returned to her hair. Her sigh was faintly echoed. She looked around again, her eyes scanning the empty room. It must be the wind, she concluded, and tried to dismiss it. But her gaze remained fixed on the mirror, which showed both her own reflection and that of her husband's portrait. Then she saw it. In the reflection, one of the painted eyes in the portrait seemed to move. A jolt went through her. I must be certain, she thought. She carefully moved a candle, casting more light onto the portrait in the mirror. There was no doubt. The eye had moved. But it was more than a movement. It looked for all the world like a wink. The very same playful wink Uncle Arthur used to give her. For the first time in a long while, Aunt Agatha felt true fear. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her mind raced with all the terrifying stories of ghosts and intruders she had ever heard. But her fear was fleeting. A moment later, that powerful will took over, and a steely calm settled upon her. She continued to arrange her hair, even beginning to hum a favorite tune in a low voice, not missing a single note. She picked up the candle again, and as if by accident, knocked over her sewing box, scattering its contents across the floor. With deliberate slowness, she bent down and began to pick up the items one by one. She retrieved a spool of thread from near the door, and then, as if on a sudden impulse, she opened the door and peered into the hallway. After a moment's feigned hesitation, she walked out quietly. Once out of the room, she moved with silent speed down the stairs. She roused the servants, ordering them to arm themselves with whatever they could find. She herself grabbed a red-hot poker from the fireplace. Followed by her trembling staff, she returned to the bedroom almost immediately. The room was just as she had left it, silent and still. "Approach the portrait," she commanded. "Pull that picture down." A heavy sigh emanated from behind the painting. The servants recoiled in terror. "Pull it down at once," my aunt cried, her voice sharp and impatient. The servants obeyed. As the portrait was torn from the wall, a secret hiding place was revealed. From within it, they dragged a large, burly man with a dark beard. He clutched a knife as long as my arm, but he was trembling from head to foot with fear. He quickly confessed everything. He had once been a servant in the house and had discovered the hiding place while helping to prepare the house for my aunt's arrival. His plan was to wait until she was asleep and then steal her box of money and jewels. To watch her, he had carefully cut a small hole in one of the portrait's eyes. Aunt Agatha did not call for the police. She preferred to administer her own form of justice. Having her own peculiar ideas about cleanliness, she ordered her staff to drag the man through the frigid horse pond to, in her words, wash away his transgressions, and then to dry him off with a firmness that left little to the imagination. But even for a woman as brave as Aunt Agatha, this adventure was a profound shock. She often remarked afterward, "It is most unpleasant for a woman to live alone in the country," and it was not long after this incident that she finally gave her hand in marriage to the wealthy gentleman of the neighborhood, Mr. Caldwell.